Good afternoon on this warm day in Boston. There's been so much news going on that we haven't even gotten to speak about all of it. But as I mentioned yesterday, this is one of my favorite Torah portions because Bilaam, who's hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Jewish people. And one of the most famous verses he says is a verse that we say every morning in our prayers when we come into the temple. You see, Bilaam tried to curse the Jewish people, but in the end, he has to bless them. And one of the verses he says is, "Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael." How good are your tents, Israel, your dwelling places, Jacob. And the rabbis say he didn't only mean the literal tents, but he meant the shuls, he meant the community centers, the things that bring the Jewish people together. And the question is, why would we choose to say this every morning when there's so many other beautiful prayers and verses that are said by Jewish prophets and by King David and by the Talmud and the Bible that speak about the power of Jewish unity, of Jewish community, of shuls? Why would we take what Bilaam said, the man who had every intention to curse the Jewish people? And of course, one of the commentaries tell us that the reason we do it is very simple. Because sometimes the greatest blessing is the one that was supposed to be a curse that turns into a blessing. You see, in life, very often, there are things that look like curses, like challenges, like struggles. And we say to ourselves, why? What did God want? What did he do? And later it turns out to be a blessing. And there's nothing that you cherish more than what you thought would be a challenge and turns into a blessing. And that's why every morning we say it. But 28 years ago, I spent the summer in Germany on the Chabad Peace Corps. And part of my job was I traveled through the communities. I did Luxembourg too, and I went to visit Jews who had been living there or just moved there from the former Soviet Union. It was right after the fall of the wall. And I went and I spent 6 weeks. There weren't many Chabad centers. Today there's many Chabad centers in Germany, but then there weren't many. And I went to these little communities. And one Shabbat I spent in Mannheim, Germany, and it was the Shabbos of Parshat Balak. And I always remember it because they asked me to speak. I didn't speak German. And the Jews there were either German Jews or Russian Jews. So I figured I'll speak in Yiddish. Many of them were elderly Jews and they remembered Yiddish from their home, and the Germans could understand it. As a young kid, I was 19 years old, and I got up there to speak. And I spoke on this verse. And I quoted what Rashi says. Rashi says, "How great are your tents, Israel, your dwelling places, Jacob." That Bilaam saw something very, the Jewish people, although they dwelled in the desert and they lived in tents right next to each other for 40 years, the Jewish people made it that the tents opening shouldn't face each other. And Rashi says it was because they didn't want to steer into someone else's life. They wanted to give them the joy, the privacy they needed. And Rashi says that Bilaam saw this. He saw the unity, the love, the respect that the Jewish people had for each other. In Yiddish we call it farginen. There's no English word for it. In Hebrew they made a word for it that came from Yiddish, lefargen, which means to genuinely be happy for someone else's success and the things they have. And Rashi is really telling us, I remember saying this so many years ago, 28 years ago, almost 29 actually. And Rashi said, and Rashi is telling us that what Bilaam was saying is to the Jewish people, you know why I can't curse you? You know what your blessing is? Your blessing is in your unity. Your blessing is in the way your tents are set. The love that you have for each other. You know, we're in crazy times. Since October 7th, the world hates us. We just had marches yesterday in front of a shul in Queens by anti-Semites. We watch what's going on all over the world. But yet, it's in our unity that we find our strength. No one predicted that Israel would be able to successfully annihilate so much of Chabad's leadership. They predicted many more soldiers would die. that the American administration that flew right after October 7th told Israel, don't go in. Just drop a few bombs because you're going to lose tens of thousands of soldiers. And it is painful. We lost over 330 soldiers. But yet, we've eliminated so many of Hamas's people. We've eliminated the tunnels. And just on Shabbos, we heard the biggest news that Israel eliminated Mohammed Def, which was the second in command in Gaza. And that Hamas is in disarray, and suddenly they're begging for a deal. And let us pray and let us hope that a deal happens and we bring the hostages home, and yet we're still able to annihilate and destroy Hamas from ever being able to be a governing entity. But let us remember what Bilaam was telling us and why we say it every single morning in our prayers. How great are our dwelling places when we love each other, when we appreciate our differences, when we understand that we come from the same place and respect each other. Then and only then will we annihilate evil. And as we say and pray to God for the ultimate day when Kisavir Memshela Zadon Mina Aretz, when God will eradicate all evil from the world. It'll be a world of love and unity. And I'll start with the unity of the Jewish people, one to each other. Have a great